There we go. That's a good lesson learned right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so um, we're talking about books and business and marketing, and the distinction between writing a marketing book or writing a book for marketing in a non-marketing niche, but using it as a marketing tool. And I think it's really interesting because we've been talking about how you should release a book one chapter at a time, and you should just get one chapter done, get it out there, and then let people either have it or sell it for cheap, or just let them have it as a lead generation tool, and then use it as an excuse to give them the next chapter, the next chapter, the next chapter, and drip it on them. It's an excuse to talk to them and get them to pay attention, and it also is, I think, increases the likelihood of them actually consuming the content, because that's really what a marketing book, a book for marketing, should have as a purpose, is to actually indoctrinate them into your product line, your abilities, your whatever, your uniqueness, and so the trick is to how do you get them to actually consume the content, to actually read it, and I
That's the
think
hard. Yeah, that might be, and if that ends up being true, and I think it has to be proven out. And again, it depends on what your purpose is for your marketing book, right? If your purpose is to do an upsell and to be able to have a nice clean way to be able to get do an outbound marketing campaign and get a lot of people attracted for a low cost of money, and then do an upsell, this is probably the wrong path altogether, right? But if you don't have that yet, or you're not going that direction, and you're looking to get people to really engage with what you're doing, and potentially, oh my goodness, get some feedback. And that's my main thing, right? Is hey, I can get it out to you and get feedback and make my content better before I get it out before I do my final version. And now you're bought in because you got ownership of it. You've actually helped to change it. You've interacted with it, and it's a small portion of actually participating and writing your own book as well. Oh, and what if I could take everybody who contributed, and before I publish the book, I get, the last, 20 pages are everybody who contributed to the book. So now you got your name in it. I think that's fantastic. I don't know.
yeah. And you were saying that maybe you should never finish your book, because that's the whole point.
Well, that's the whole point. Exactly. In other words, it's such a good marketing. Yeah. There's such a good marketing event, if you will, or a series of events. Well, why don't you want to just keep those going? Because they're growing and growing and growing, especially as you're giving them the opportunity to use them for word of mouth and to influence others and to tell people, because it's something that they're more personally proud of. And of course, it's also a great way, but by the time you do end up finishing it, I think that it's been bored out in the industry that people are actually paying for content that they've already seen, like in blogs, right? They've seen all the content in the blog, and then the book comes out with all the content in the blog, and they buy the book, right? So it's kind of leveraging off of that a little bit in that kind of way. And I don't think it's new either. We were just talking about that either. I've had Rob Slee is the example I brought up in his book called Time Really Is Money, and he and I have interacted on a couple of other things before, but I'm sure he went out to a list of people, but he made it feel really personal to get my feedback on a book, on a chapter he was writing, right? Actually, there's a couple of chapters. He didn't give me every chapter, but I think it was like 2, 7, and 9 or something like that, right? The kind of different chapters are on different things. And I think one of the chapters was just completely off course for me, but the other two were right on, and I gave him feedback on those. And so it made me, before the book is ever out, I'm giving it word of mouth, and I'm using the stuff from the chapters that I read and saw. He has a graphic called the value ladder, right? That really is a good way to kind of illustrate the kinds of roles you play as an owner, and what your hourly wage typically is when you're playing those roles, to help people understand kind of the E-Myth thing, working on versus working in your business, and how detrimental it is. And I've used that over and over again. And every time I do, I credit it the book. Time Really Is Money. So so your sphere of influence and your word of mouth, without having to do direct advertising, goes way up. And the people who do know about it, because it's such specialized information, they feel like they're in the know. I know that's.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that comes from you actually consuming the material that he gave to you, and not just breezing through it, but actually focused on it like you were going to critique it, and
Absolutely.
somehow I think
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I see what you're saying. You're saying the different mindset. Yeah, but it clicked my mind to a different level because my mind wasn't in a I'm going to consume and try to learn. It was in a okay, I need to look at this information critically, which also helps you. Yeah, it helps you consume it at a different level. Good point.
so being the guy that always wants to convert this stuff to evergreen, I like to
Sure.
build systems that you don't have to mess with later,
Yeah.
and you know never actually finishing the book and putting out more chapters and stuff to me just feels wrong. I mean, because I want to make it so I can walk away from it a little bit,
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think having that entire concept in place and having one chapter left, the final chapter of the book, and you're asking
Oh,
people that, hey, how do I sum this up? I'm
beautiful.
trying to write the last chapter of my book, and I just it's so important. I can't blow it on the
Yeah.
last chapter. How do I sum this whole thing up? How do I put that last nail in the coffin? I guess that's a terrible analogy, but how do I get this to really hit for people, and how do I sum it up? How do I complete this book, and then just leave it at that point and let people and you could have like a completed
Yeah.
book out there someplace if you needed to do a book funnel or whatever.
Well, I think it's still valuable to have the book at the end. I mean, I think that's really valuable. And yeah, absolutely. You can, and then you can use it for all those other purposes. Just that you'll have generated a lot of marketing in the interim. In fact, you may have been generated. Let's go back to let's go back to quality traffic, right? So one thing we're trying to get is high quality people to read our books and to want to have our content, right? So in other words, this allows. I think this may be the way that you're going to get a lot higher quality individuals who are getting it out to, and that could be proven wrong on that. But if you are and you're touching the right kinds of people, then whatever upsells you do have, whatever credibility gain you're going to get from it, is going to be multiplied because you're not out doing the outbound thing. Of course, you could do the outbound thing at the end. I mean, in fact, it wouldn't surprise me at all. What if you did something really interesting and you took a lot longer to do it? So you made sure. Let me just put it this way: a lot of the marketing books I read aren't good reads. Good content, but they're not good reads. Okay, now you take a book like E-Myth, for instance. In my opinion only, because everybody reads and gets something different out of them from different reasons. I do too, right? But take E-Myth. E-Myth to me was a well-written book. And the reason I say that is because it was very interesting. I really enjoyed the conversations in E-Myth. I think I read that book in 2007. I think it was 2007 I read that book for the first time. I said to myself, why hadn't I read this sooner? It was one of those, right? But I really enjoyed the book itself, not just the content. The content was interesting, and I can sum it up in 10 seconds and give everybody what you get out of the book. But I really enjoyed the conversations they were having in the book, the style that he used to sit down with a business owner and then have them stating what they were stating and having that conversation going back and forth like we're having now. I think that there's a value in the actual quality of the material itself. And if you take your time to deliver it, you may be able to get more of that, right? And so, to your point, I use the never finish the book. It's actually, I don't really mean that when I say that, right? That's more of a Joshism, right? What I mean is, I use that to illustrate the point, right? But I mean, what if you took 2 months per chapter, right, to really do something interesting and play with it? Because I do that as a writer, as a non-writer writing a book. I say that's what I meant to say as a writer, as a non-writer writing a book or authoring a book. I find that if I could take a small section, I can really do something interesting with it. I can make the stories, but when I expand that thinking, it's so difficult work for me as a non-writer. As a writer, this is like no brainer, right? But as a non-writer, it's so difficult that I can only do it in small pieces and small chunks. So it's going to take me a lot longer to get a book out. Well, this is partially just me figuring out how I can do best for me, right? That's what we're sure. But that I think that might be something that would work out well for me in terms of, and probably important and potentially others, and might also be more beneficial depending on what your purpose is for the book.
Yeah. Is it a marketing piece, or is it a complete system that you need people to consume before they can value your product? You know,
Yeah.
it's really those
Yeah.
books fall into a bunch of different purposes and categories depending on what your business is. You know.
Yeah. Well, tell me. So let me drill into you a little bit here, or pull some stuff out of you a little bit more. So, right, is because you know this stuff, you get it. How do you generally think about what happens in people's mind when they see that someone's an author? What are you seeing in the marketplace, and what kind of effects is that having, kind of a thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason why author is the first part of the word authority. You know, I mean, it really does give you authority.
Yeah.
And having a printed one out, you know, I mean, an actual book is great for in-person, you know, interactions. But the fact is that, you know, you needed to have a larger reach than that. And it does give you authority. And it's funny because, like, for example, Frank's books, people do read them and they are good and they're full of useful information, but they are absolutely not essential to his sales process. You know, it is not, you don't have to read them. In fact, it doesn't matter at all if you have read them.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So,
Absolutely. I'm case in point. I have bought one of his books and I haven't read it. I've skimmed it, but I haven't read it. Yeah.
right. So it provides the authority front end for the stuff that he's actually making money off on the back end.
Exactly.
Which is consulting, which is group consulting, which is membership. And then ultimately, you know, his services business is like the advertising agency and all that. But, you know, I think for, like, in your position, you'd be far better off to have somebody actually read the book, because you want them to understand the basic concepts before they walk in. And now you're going to charge them a premium to actually implement what we talked about in the book, you know?
Yeah. Oh, it's a must do. That's an interesting distinction, right? That's an interesting distinction you bring out, because the stuff that I'm doing is, of course, just like anybody else. To me, it's just like the simplest thing in the world. Oh, it's colored boxes, for instance, right? Oh, these colored boxes are the simplest organizational model you've ever seen in your life, right? It's way simpler than a hierarchy, right? And everybody goes, what? You know, because, and it's a real simple concept: input, output, plus ones, minus ones. It's a real simple concept, but it's very difficult. It's change. And so anytime it doesn't matter how simple it is, anytime you're changing, it requires a completely different level, to your point, and you need to get to a point of education before you understand it, before it's going to draw you in, right? And I love that from a book. So that's true with someone like me. That gets into a little different aspect of the book. Why does anybody need a book, right? And I need a book to be able to have that concept, like the working in versus on your business. The working in versus working on is a very simple concept. But I tell you what, with people, guess what the number one thing I've struggled with CEOs is in helping them do? Understand that concept.
Exactly.
Yet it's the simplest concept in the world. In versus on. Come on, right? And E-Myth really helps people understand that, and it puts it in the language everybody can have a common language. You know, another example of that. I don't want to go down a tangent, but the other example of that is the business model canvas from the book, the business model generation, right? And that is another instance of it. You've got a really complicated thing called business model that everybody uses, including myself, for years incorrectly, right? Well, who's to say it's incorrect, right? You could say your version was the right way, obviously. But the business model canvas said you got a bunch of teams that one person's talking revenue model and a business model, and they mean how we're going to get to market. One person's talking business model, and they mean how we're going to make money, right? And they said, no, the business model is actually these 11 different components. And that simplified it down. And that's what a book really gives people, don't you think? Is that ability to go through, like, the business model generation and take a very complicated topic like business model that is just one word. I mean, it's just one word: business model, right?
It's 2 words.
Stewart. Well, yeah. You're 100% right. In my mind, I was looking at them individually. I didn't say it out loud, so you can't.
Yeah, it's more of a who moved my cheese level of
Ooh, I like
you
that.
know
Yeah.
understanding a concept. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you want to get people to absolutely consume that concept and the content and I can see like with colored boxes, just the actual content of the book would actually be less than 60 pages.
Yeah.
But if you could intersperse it with some really fun storytelling,
Well,
kind of like Who
that's
Moved My Cheese,
right.
it's still a very short book.
That's what I see, and I'd love to be able to spend the time to do that. That's my point. I really, so maybe this whole thing everybody called BS on this whole model. I think is Josh, you're just finding a way to have fun doing it, and they wouldn't necessarily be wrong, right? Because that's a way for me to make a book an enjoyable experience and still get the value short term and not have to wait for the value. Because that's my issue with the book. It's so big, and I want to do such a good job. So I'm not necessarily a perfectionist like a lot of people are, but there's a level of that it's got to represent me, right? I mean, I don't. In fact, I teach people in presenting how to present as themselves. I don't want them to be a little bit sloppy in places because it's very natural, right? I don't want them to come off fake, right? I want them to be who they are, right? And have them come out. That's what I mean. Is I don't necessarily I don't want perfection in that way, but I do want it to be an instantiation of who I am. I want it to be representative of, and so I don't want to put a crappy book out there. I want to put a book out there that people are kind of like, well, I look for what I am, right? They read the book and they get energy. They get energized.
Mm-hmm.
That should really be.
So the unfinished book, I think, might be the key to that, and to getting past perfectionism too.
Yeah.
Because the fact is in this one-off printing, self-publishing world out there, even in the printed version world of publishing, you have something you don't like in the book, you just change it and upload a new file. I mean,
Dude,
all the books from now on are now have that change, and it's like you don't have to go to press again.
You know what you just created? You just invented Wikibooks. Yeah. A brand new category. You just did. I'm not kidding. Yeah, Wikibooks. It's a brand new category. Absolutely. That's a great idea. Born right here, right in this real time.
That will also clear out the perfectionism in there, because you're like, well, I'm done with this as it is so far, so I'm just going to push the print button, and then move on to something else. And if something changes, then I can reprint it,
Well, and everybody discovers it in the current state, and everybody can contribute to it.
Yeah.
I mean, you just actually did. I mean, that's a hell of an idea.
And you could actually print in that printed book, you could have the last chapter be unfinished and just say, I'm still working on this chapter and I'm really hoping you'll help contribute to it.
Yeah.
And in the print, can you imagine reading a book and you're done and you're like, you're at the last chapter and you're like, what?
Oh, especially on like a Kindle or something, right? If you're right, it's funny if you're reading the book and it changes as you're reading it. that could be the new world kind of a thing, right? That's real. That there you go. That's the book for millennials, the wiki book kind of an idea. But I like the whole. But I know you weren't going that far. But I get to your point. I like it a lot. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's an interesting concept that takes the value of the book, because the book is a very valuable piece of work. It's a long, and also what you may be starting to tap into here is how do you this kind of gets into my unique stuff, right? Is the idea that we all know that we have a lot inside us, and we're looking to pull these things out of us, like the interactions that we're having now, right? We got real-time stuff going on, and the question is, maybe something like this allows more people to get to the level of depth that they haven't ever realized. I do this all the time. The cool thing about this simple thing called colored boxes is it gets people really deep. It's simple concept, but the first time they get their systems out of their heads and into a model that they could do something with it. And other authors have written this. This is not unique to me, but the idea is when you can see the systems that you're working in versus just having them in your head, it changes everything.
Oh yeah, getting stuff out of your head and onto paper changes everything.
And you had no idea, and what allows you to do is to go way deeper because that part's been unloaded. This is other people. That part gets unloaded, and you can now get deeper. So what ends up happening is that's what the thing with the book that you're talking about. That all of a sudden this whole business model came flying in front of me, right? Around creating these things called wiki books that allow people to. It draws them out of it, right? It does it through conversation. It transcribes it automatically because we can do that no problem these days, right? And then you can have different people contributing. To edit it and make it something. And, within 12, can you imagine that? You go and have a 2-hour recording, and by the by the next day, 24 hours later, you've got a completed book that is selling unlimited copies out. I mean, really, I'm jumping into the future. Okay, I do that. All right, there you go. Sometimes I have to live somewhere else because I don't like how we are today. There you go. So my bad. Sorry to interrupt. A brief interruption in our main program. Right, how they do that on Monty Python. And now back to our feature presentation.
And now for something completely
Exactly. I love that. That's cool.
Yeah. So the wiki book or the never ending.
The never ending. Yeah.
Author. Because
the idea is a wiki book. That wouldn't be the title of it. I agree with you. Yeah. The endless book. The it's an ongoing book. It's a
forever unfinished.
Forever unfinished. Right. Exactly. Yeah. Or there was a song in the 80s called Forever You. It's something something about that Forever You, which by the way, I had some people I went to college with that basically they stayed at the U for a long time. They were there for 10, 15 years. That was different. Different thing entirely. See,
I kind of was that guy too. So it only took me 7 years.
Right.